this video we're going to look at soil, and talk about the different types of soil, why it's important, and we'll go into some uses of it and how plants use it.
Unless you spend a lot of time underground like we do, you might not think very often about dirt. But dirt is awesome. It's everywhere, and just about every living thing on Earth depends on it, from the plants that grow in it, to the animals that eat the plants, to the animals that eat those animals. That's why we're really glad that one of our viewers, 4-year-old Caleb from Mississippi, wrote to ask us, what is dirt? Great question. First of all, the stuff that fills our flower pots and baseball fields may just be dirt to us, but scientists have a different name for it. They call the top layer that covers most of the land soil. So what is soil? Well, it's a mixture of things. How soil looks and feels depends on where you are. So some very dry places have a lot of gritty sand in the soil, while soil in other parts of the world might have hard rocks, soft clay, or even pieces of seashell in it. Usually though, soil is made of 4 main things. Mostly, soil is made up of minerals. Minerals are hard, stony substances that form things like rocks, sand, and clay. The next big part of soil is water. That's right, even if a clump of dirt doesn't seem like mud to you, it actually has water in it. All living things need water to survive, and soil does a great job of holding on to water for plants, animals, and other things that live in it. And you know what else is in the soil that you probably can't tell is there? Air. Just like water, air in the soil is important because living things need air too. It fills the spaces between all those little bits of minerals, water, and other parts of the soil. And the beauty of it is, the animals that live in the soil actually help more water and air get inside it. Creatures like worms and insects and even small mammals like moles and mice dig tunnels down in the dirt. Those tunnels let air and water trickle in and flow around so that even deep down, the soil has what living things need to make a nice home there. And this, my friends, brings us to probably the most important part of soil. In fact, it's some of the most important stuff on Earth. Scientists call it organic matter. Organic matter includes anything that's alive, like those worms and insects, but also parts of plants and even living things that we can't even see, like bacteria. Plus, organic matter also includes things that used to be alive, like dead plants and animals. After those things die, other living things like fungi, bacteria, insects, and worms eat what's left of those plants and animals and break them down into very small pieces. This broken down material puts nutrients back into the soil, and plants then use those nutrients to grow. So soil is where plants get their food. Scientists call this special nutrient-rich part of the soil by its own name, humus. Humus is what gives soil its dark brown color, and it even sometimes contains special bacteria that make soil smell, well, dirty. Now, all of these things are mixed together to make soil, but the mixture isn't always the same. Scientists have found that soil has many layers to it. The top layer is all made up of organic matter, with lots of that good, useful humus. Beneath that is the layer that we often call topsoil. Topsoil is made mostly of humus, with a little bit of minerals sprinkled in. This layer is where seeds start to grow. As you go further down away from the surface, you find that the deeper layers of soil contain more minerals than humus. And once you get through the bottom layer, you run into a layer of solid rock. So now you have the dirt on soil, and you know it's made up of minerals, water, air, and organic matter. Thank you for asking, Caleb. Does anybody else have a question? Let us know by either leaving a comment or emailing us at kids@thescishow.com. Thanks, guys, and see you next time on SciShow Kids.
Alright, so a really important aspect that they talked about in that video, and I hope you made a note of it, is organic matter. We'll talk about that in this video, but that is one of the crucial aspects of soil that's really important. The layers of the soil they talked about at the end are not particularly important. This is not part of our course. We're not going to assess that. But definitely what soil is, what it's made up of, and what the organic matter is part of the course. So in Australia alone, we have 14 different types of soil. The function of the soil is to hold water, it's the home to organisms, etc., and it's to provide nutrients. So that's a really important thing. Make sure you write down those 3 dot points. That's the function of soil. Equally important are the 3 main types of soil. So there is sand, silt, clay, and loam is actually a combination of those 3 above. So sand, silt, and clay are the 3 main types, and loam, which you often see, you can get sandy loam, organic loam, things like that from the hardware store or the landscaping places. That's actually a combination. It's not specifically a type of soil. When we talk about soil texture, we're talking about the feel of the soil, and we can use this to determine how much sand, how much silt, and how much clay it actually contains. Scientists will often texture soil to find out more about it, and this is a very hands-on approach. they can then classify the soil depending on how much of each of these minerals they contain. So for us, when we do the soil practical, the soil that you collect, you will have that opportunity to texture it and try and identify which kind of soil you actually have in your garden.
When gardening, soil is the single most important variable to consider. Soil is valuable for a number of reasons: absorbing and retaining water, as a source of nutrients, as an anchor for the plant, and as a home to a myriad of visible and invisible forms of life. When classified by texture, there are three main types of soil: sandy, silt, clay, and the ideal mix, an equal combination of sand, silt, and clay, which is called loam. First, let's take a closer look at the three main types of soil texture. This is sand soil. Made up of larger granules, when wet, it won't hold shape at all. Silt soil is made up of medium-sized granules. When picked up, it has a floury, dry feel. When wet, it cannot hold shape well. Clay soil is very fine. It makes a hard crust after rain and holds its shape when wet. Now, let's look at how the three types absorb water. After 1 minute, our three types of soil have reacted very differently. Sand has almost completely absorbed the water. Silt has absorbed water, but significantly slower than sand. Clay is the slowest to absorb. Nearly all the water remains on top.
As we just saw, the challenge of sandy soil is that it drains fast, losing water and nutrients quickly. Clay soil, on the other hand, doesn't drain well and it can cause waterlogging and root rot.
Both can be improved by adding compost, which helps sandy soil retain water and improves drainage in clay. While texture is an important factor, you can learn more about the organic matter, nutrient, and mineral content of your soil by collecting a sample and having it analyzed. Your local Texas A&M AgriLife Extension office will provide you with more information and the sample bags.
So even if your soil looks like this, with patience, knowledge, and the right approach, you can improve it to get plentiful harvests. Thank you for watching, and if you are interested in learning more about vegetable gardening, check out our other videos.
So firstly, I doubt any of you are going to go send off your soil to America. There are probably places in Australia that do the same thing if you're really that keen. I also suspect he probably pre-dug those carrots, as they seem to pull out so conveniently and perfectly that it felt a little bit staged. But otherwise, it was a great video talking about the texture of it. So by adding water, you can look at how it actually holds its shape, and by a bit of feel, you can get a bit of an idea of the size of the granules as well. So another important aspect is, what is soil and how is it made? So we need a few things in order to make soil. Firstly, we need some bedrock, we need water, we need a bit of air, we need that organic matter that we talked about before, and this could be decaying plant and animal material. We need living organisms such as bacteria, fungi, and worms, and we also need a lot of time. So step one is take a giant bedrock, weather it down with the wind and water, throw in a long period of time to break down this rock into small particles of clay, silt, sand, and gravel, depending on how long it's been. Add in some organic matter, such as decaying plant leaves, branches, etc., dead animals. Mix it really well, throw in a bunch of living organisms, such as this bacteria, fungi, earthworms, to break down that organic matter, and voila, you have yourself some soil. There is a link down here which is about texturing soil at home. So it's a good little video. It shows you how to do it in terms of putting soil in your hand and sort of squishing it and looking at whether it holds shape or not, and then adding some water to it. So we could use this video for our soil experiment, and if you're interested in what kind of soil you've got at home and you're not sure, that's a great little activity to have a look at. When we talk about soil composition, we're talking about what it's made of. So the word composition is basically saying, what is it composed of? What things make it up? Generally, as a rule, the darker the soil, the more nutrients it contains. So we want very dark soils. A really light coloured soil suggests it doesn't have a lot of nutrient to it, and that's not generally good if we're planting things or we want to grow something in it. Soils differ from country to country, state to state, and even between backyards, as you'll see when you start bringing in the soil that you have. In order to understand this soil and how one soil is different from another, scientists measure a range of soil properties, such as the colour and the texture. We can study these properties to determine the quality of the soil and also which soil will be best for growing which crops. So we might look at a particular soil and say, oh, it's very high in this nutrient, this specific plant thrives in that environment, so we'll plant this crop there. It's not a matter of just saying, yep, we're going to plant apple trees here and hope that they work. It's a lot more scientific than that process. So soil composition continued. Soils form from rocks and minerals as they break down into small particles due to rain, wind, and frost. That's something that you should definitely write down in your notes. That's a very important aspect of what soil is. To make healthy soil that we can use to grow crops, 3 more ingredients are also needed. We need air, water, and this organic matter. Organic matter includes all living things such as bacteria and worms, as well as the decomposed remains of plants and animals, so those non-living things. A good note to write down in your book is that organic matter is any living or dead animal and plant material. That's a nice short little sentence that explains and how you would define what organic matter is. It includes the living plant roots and animals, plant and animal remains at various stages of decomposition, and microorganisms and their excretions. The benefits of organic matter include that it's a source of 90 to 95% of nitrogen in the soil. Without this fertilizer, which is an essential nutrient for plant growth. So nitrogen is something that we add to soil. That's the fertilizer. We're adding nitrogen. But without adding nitrogen, adding additional fertilizers which have their own environmental impact, 90 to 95% of nitrogen comes from this organic matter. The organic matter increases the soil water holding capacity. We often call this water retention. So our experiment is actually going to look at that. Our practical activity is all about the water retention. So how much water can the organic matter hold? So looking at the soils that we use, if you have a lot of organic matter, we would expect it to hold a lot more water. The organic matter also increases air and water flow rates. So it would probably be worth writing these 4 or 3 dot points down in terms of what are the benefits, why is organic matter important. Soil degradation. Soil degradation is about reducing the quality of soil. So degradation means to break it down or reduce its efficiency. Plants, including the crops that supply a lot of our food, need to be grown in healthy soil that can provide them with the essential nutrients. It can be the loss of organic matter, the decline in soil fertility, and the structural condition, erosion, and the effects of toxic chemicals that can affect this. Soil degradation can involve the following things. So firstly, soil degradation is when soil becomes damaged. So that is what we mean by it. It's when the soil is damaged. For example, too much farming leads to the loss of nutrients, and we've talked about that in the earlier video. Clearing the forests causes erosion, which washes the soil away before we can even use it. Cattle cause the soil to pack down so that the air and the organisms in it can't breathe and the air can't circulate. So the heavy weight of the cattle and their small hoofs really pack it in and make the ground really hard. And hard, dense, compact soil is not a good thing. The other issue we have in soil degradation is salinity. So the soil becomes far too salty, and that's another really big one. We also have water erosion. So it includes sheet, rill, and gully erosion. So basically the water is washing away that soil. It ties in with the forests causing erosion, but depending on the way the water is controlled, regulated, and directed, that can also have a large impact. We also have wind erosion. So if it's very sandy kind of soil or it's very soft and loose on top, the wind can actually blow it away. We have a loss of organic matter, fertility decline, structural decline, which is such as soil compaction and surface sealing, soil contamination, including the effects of toxic chemicals and pollutants. Did you know that there's actually a secret killer hiding in your kitchen cupboard? Its name is sometimes called the White Death, but we actually know it more commonly as salt. So salt for us is generally harmless. What we put on our food and things like that doesn't have any significant effects on us. If you have too much of it over a long period of time, it certainly can, but in general, it's more or less harmless to us. In terms of soil, however, it's a very different story. Lots of Australian farmers struggle to grow crops because of a high amount of salt in their soil. How did the salt get there though? And how does it affect the growth of plants and the wheat crops? When we talk about soil salinity, we're talking about the salt content in the soil. So that's the definition of soil salinity. Salt occurs naturally within the soil and water, but salty soil can be caused by a natural process such as the gradual withdrawal of an ocean or artificial processes such as irrigation and road salt. Dryland salinity talks about salinity in the dry lands, which can occur when the water table is between 2 and 3 meters from the surface of the soil. The salts from the groundwater are raised to the surface of the soil. For example, if we clear trees for agriculture, this is a major reason that this dryland salinity occurs, because the trees are normally constantly soaking up that water and they keep the water level lower in the water table. If we cut all these trees down, that water table starts to rise closer and closer to the soil, and that brings all the salt with it. Irrigation salinity is another factor. So salinity from irrigation can occur over time wherever we're irrigating, and irrigating is just to water. Since most of all the water, even the natural rainfall, contains some dissolved salts. The plants use up the water, and this leaves behind the salt to sit on the soil, which eventually builds up every time we water or every time it rains. Salt from irrigation water is also greatly increased by poor drainage. Salinity in urban areas often results from the combination of irrigation and groundwater. Some of the consequences of salinity are detrimental effects on the plant's growth and yield, so that plants will not grow as well, as fast, or as effectively as they could, and the things that they produce, so the crops, the wheat, the fruit, etc. that they produce will be significantly affected. It can have damage to infrastructure. So things like roads, bricks, corrosion of pipes and cables is another big issue with salinity or salt in the soil. It also has a reduction of water quality for users. So both livestock and humans suddenly can't use this water because it's too salty. Soil erosion ultimately, when crops are too strong, affected by the amount of salts. So if we have too much salt, the crops will then start to die, and as the crops die, we then get more soil erosion. And we also require far more energy to desalinate that soil. So if we want to then take the soil or the water and take the salt out of it, it takes a lot of energy to do so.
Soil's almost an unknown universe in that there's over 6 billion microorganisms of huge diversity in a small spoonful of soil, of healthy soil, which is really quite amazing. Don't know who counted them, but someone did.
Tough job. Yeah.
I was in regional Victoria in Australia to meet Cole Seitz, a champion of regenerative agriculture. Cole helps farmers around the world use plants to pull carbon from the atmosphere and put it into their soils. Because our constant ploughing of the soil has released billions of tonnes of the stuff.
Over the last 10,000 years of agriculture, the degradation of soils has been one of the leading causes of climate change. It's actually, as of right now, a larger cause of climate change than burning fossil fuels.
I asked Cole to strike a farming calendar pose to explain how he brings the carbon back home. Plants use carbon dioxide and energy from the sun to create simple sugars. The plant uses some of these sugars to grow. The rest is pumped into the soil through the roots. These sugars feed soil microbes, which interact with the plant, and the carbon dioxide taken from the atmosphere is sequestered into the soil as carbon.
G'day.
Razor.
Hey, Damon. You too.
How you going?
Yeah, very well. G'day, Cole.
We went to take the kids fishing and we had to go and find worms on the farm, and Fraser was just we were going from paddock to paddock trying to find worms.
There wasn't any.
There was none. And it ended up, well, this fun experience ended up being not so fun because there was so much frustration about how come there weren't any worms, and because healthy soil has worms.
We had everything going for our farm, and I didn't feel that it was getting the yields and getting the results that I, thought were going to be there. And I tried just throwing more fertiliser at it, and that didn't seem to work. And so I just had all these questions around what we're doing and why we're doing it.
So what's going on here, fellas?
So this is what we'd call a chemical summer fallow, where we control the weeds with chemical over summer.
So how does that affect the soil, like in terms of the...
This form of agriculture really kills the whole soil ecosystem.
So what are we looking at there, Cole?
That hard compaction, low, poor structured soil is really not good in agriculture. Like if you think about a plant trying to get through that, almost impossible. Yeah. The other thing too, water can't get in there.
To counteract these problems, Cole's simple advice to Fraser was to start planting.
Okay, so what we've done here is plant a mix of different species, about 8 in total. They all play a role in the soil health with their different roots and different root exudates. Yep. So we've got the sunflower here and the sorghum, millet.
Yeah, right.
Down here.
And all these together means, because that variety, it's making the soil, it's pulling the carbon into the soil and making it healthier.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Go nature.
Yeah.
If we go back even a few thousand years, all the grasslands in the world were dominated by large mobs of grazing animals. And also they were kept moving all the time by predators. So the animals, or in this case cattle, are never kept on the same area at one time.
By letting the cattle run amok in the crops, good things happen. They flatten the field, they create a utopia for the local insects, which becomes a natural fertiliser, and crucially, they are fed as nature intended.
Over the last 50 or 60 years, we've removed animals like cattle and sheep from eating their natural food and put them in feedlots eating grain. And we should never have done that because they've never evolved to eat grain. So what happens is that the cattle are basically sick. And we're finding out now that the meat from feedlots is not healthy for us. It's certainly not healthy for the animals. And it's something that we should never have done.
Any discussion around livestock has to include methane, which is another damaging greenhouse gas, quite rudely burped out by the cows. While some livestock practices offset that damage, the bad news for the hot dog kid is that we need to embrace a more plant-rich diet. And the meat we do eat should ideally come from regenerative practices like Fraser's.
Plant-rich diet means that we actually reduce the amount of protein that we eat in wealthier nations because it's too high. It's 100, 110 grams per day. What we model is decreasing that to 50, 60 grams. And the fact is, some people want to eat meat. What meat they eat is critically important. How it's produced, how it relates to the land are very, very important.
But as our climate becomes increasingly volatile, this type of farming has one more crucial advantage.
For every 1% increase in carbon to 30 centimetres, we increase the water holding capacity of soil by 166,000 litres per hectare on every rainfall event.
When it rains, the soil on the left, with more carbon and organic matter, absorbs the water and less runs off the top. Whereas the chemical-ridden soil on the right absorbs almost no water and allows it to run off, taking the chemicals with it into nearby rivers and waterways.
That's the way we can buffer against droughts and dry seasons. Grasslands all around the world, they virtually had a built-in irrigation system.
As you really can see the aggregation that's going on from all these roots of all the different plants we've been growing in here. So what we've got going here with this clod is basically a dry paddock with not much growing in it apart from a few weeds.
Yeah.
And here 3 months ago we planted the multi-species grazing crop. Yeah.
So that's in 3 months that's happened.
That's in 3 months. It's incredible, isn't it?
That kind of represents big ag, and this represents Mother Nature. And it's pretty obvious who I'd rather get my source of vegetables from.
Well, I mean, we talk about trying to work out some of the global problems and trying to do it quickly. Well, you can really see the speed that it can happen here. I mean, look at all these roots. Like, that's all carbon pumped, isn't it?
It is. It really shows that plants and more plants, in other words, plant diversity, plus grazing animals, will create that and fix our problems.
People ask me, well, what can we say to farmers? And the answer is we can't do it without you. We can't mitigate climate change without agriculture. So we have to find ways, better ways for agriculture to become part of the solution instead of part of the problem.
Fraser will now let his multi-species crop break down. He can then plant his commercial crops here without having to break the soil and release carbon. But perhaps most importantly, he can now take the kids fishing.
I hope you've gained an appreciation for soil and how important it is for the growth of plants and for us, for life in general. And hopefully you realize it's more than just dirt in the ground now. You should have taken notes along the way, and more importantly, you should have notes on anything that was outlined in red or anything that I specifically mentioned is important. So some of those would include what soil is, what it's made up of, the types of soil, what organic matter is and how it's made or what it's made of, as well as the possible ways that soil can be degraded. So the soil degradation section and salinity and what soil salinity is all about. All right, see you next lesson.